September 17, 1944, 5:30 hours. Early morning fog clung to the lowlands of the Netherlands, weaving through canals, hedgerows, and the skeletal remains of bombed-out farmhouses. From the skies above, the first American C-47 transport aircraft rattled through clouds like swarming hornets, carrying the men of the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions toward their assigned drop zones in the Arnhem corridor. Across the River Rhine, German sentries huddled under their pillboxes and observation posts, rifles ready, though unaware of the storm about to descend upon them. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Ned Carter of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment felt the familiar adrenaline surge as he checked the static line of his chute one last time. The darkness of dawn made the fields below seem deceptively quiet, and the mist masked the real danger lying beneath. Hundreds of experienced Waffen-SS soldiers occupying reinforced positions along the narrow roads and farm tracks that led into the town of Arnhem. Intelligence had reported the presence of German armoured units, but the scale, Carter realised as he peered through the cockpit window, was far larger than anticipated. The first sticks jumped, their boots swinging in the morning air. Sergeant Daniel Harmon, a veteran of Sicily and Normandy, landed in a meadow strewn with wet reeds and hedgerow debris. He hit the mud hard and rolled instinctively, hearing the whistle of bullets tearing past him before his parachute line snatched him upright. Nearby, Private James O'Leary struggled with a tangled chute, cursing under his breath as tracer rounds cut the mist around him. In the span of a few seconds, the idyllic Dutch countryside transformed into a deadly killing field. Yet despite the chaos, the paratroopers followed their orders with terrible precision. Their mission: secure the bridges over the lower Rhine, prevent German reinforcements from reaching the Allied front, and allow the British XXX Corps to advance into northern Holland. Strategically, the plan was bold, almost audacious. Intelligence had underestimated German presence. Even as American pathfinders dropped earlier to mark landing zones with Eureka beacons, reports indicated that several units had missed their zones entirely, scattered by unexpected anti-aircraft fire. Corporal Henry Van Dusen, part of the 82nd Airborne's Pathfinder team, later recalled, "We dropped into complete darkness. The ground crews had been told the fields would be clear. They weren't. We hit trees, ditches, and barbed wire. By the time we regrouped, we were a fraction of the men we expected, and the enemy already knew we were there. By 8 hours, the first U.S. units had formed improvised groups, trying to consolidate their positions toward Arnhem's northern bridges, engaging small German outposts along the way. The Germans were efficient, trained for rapid response, and the sheer density of SS troops made every step forward perilous. Major Heinrich Müller, commanding the 9th SS Panzer Division, surveyed the advancing paratroopers with growing alarm. "They are everywhere," he muttered to his staff. "They may be small in number, but they move like shadows, striking in unpredictable patterns." In the first 2 hours, U.S. forces suffered heavy casualties. Mortars from concealed German positions ripped through hedgerows, while machine gun nests cut down small groups attempting to advance. Captain Robert Bob Simmons of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment noted in his journal, "We are spread too thin, but we must hold. Every second counts. If we fail to hold the northern bridge, the entire corridor collapses." Despite the harrowing losses, the Americans employed a tactic that would define their team: stand in Arnhem, mobility, improvisation, and local initiative. Small squads, often cut off from their battalions, formed temporary fighting groups. They seized farmhouses, hedgerows, and even abandoned vehicles to establish firing positions, delaying the German advance. The aim was not necessarily to capture ground immediately, but to disrupt, distract, and absorb the enemy's combat power. By once hours, the strategic implications of their actions became clear. The 9th SS Panzer, with its armoured columns, was being funneled into narrow roads, blocked by scattered paratrooper squads who wielded bazookas, Browning automatic rifles, and even improvised explosives. Lieutenant Karl Reuter, a German platoon leader, noted with frustration, "These Americans are not trying to hold territory. One moment they are here, the next they are gone, leaving us exposed to ambush after ambush." Range, and the chaos of the drop, meant that many officers had lost their maps and orders. But this very confusion became an asset. With German commanders receiving fragmented reports of multiple, unknown paratrooper positions, they overestimated the scale of the assault. By mid-morning, orders from Divisional HQ indicated that SS units should consolidate defensively rather than push aggressively, a critical advantage for the lightly armed Americans. Corporal Harmon later reflected, "We didn't have the numbers to take Arnhem outright, we knew it. But if we could delay them, even just for a day or two, we'd be buying time for the rest of the operation. That was our mission: hold, disrupt, survive." At 3 hours, US paratroopers began to realize the full scale of their predicament. German armored units had circled Arnhem, effectively surrounding the American forces. Food were unevenly distributed. Lieutenant Carter gathered his officers in a half-ruined farmhouse and outlined a grim but vital strategy. "We can't break out now. The SS are too strong. But we can hold them here, tie up their best units, and prevent them from reinforcing other sectors. 10,000 enemy troops, possibly more, they will bleed here while we survive." It was a radical departure from conventional military doctrine. Typically, encircled units sought breakout maneuvers. Here, the Americans consciously chose to let themselves be contained, leveraging their mobility, marksmanship, and morale against numerically superior but slower-moving armoured and mechanized units. Major Heinrich Müller, observing from Arnhem's town hall, was bewildered. Why do they fight in such small, uncoordinated bands? It makes no sense. The answer, unknown to the Germans at the time, lay in a combination of training, initiative, and sheer determination. Every American paratrooper carried with him not just weapons, but the mindset to operate independently, make tactical decisions in the field, and exploit German assumptions about how a fight should unfold. By late afternoon, the first signs of a psychological toll on the Germans emerged. Conflicting reports, exaggerated sightings, and constant harassment created the impression of a much larger American force than actually existed. Panzer commanders, expecting to crush the airborne units swiftly, found themselves stalled, forcing local infantry and artillery to remain tied down around Arnhem. Meanwhile, inside the town, paratroopers moved with grim efficiency. Medic teams improvised field hospitals in cellars and attics. Snipers picked off officers attempting to coordinate reinforcements. Explosives disabled armoured vehicles attempting to advance along narrow streets. Even as the SS commanders frantically attempted to assemble battalions and tanks for a decisive attack, they found themselves consistently harassed by units that, in theory, should have been overwhelmed. By dusk, the Americans had achieved a remarkable tactical feat. Though surrounded, they had immobilized a significant portion of the German forces, preventing them from influencing the broader Allied offensive in Holland. Captain Simmons, exhausted, noted in his journal, "We didn't take Arnhem today, but we may have done something far more important. We held the enemy in place, made them fear us, and gave our army the opening it needed elsewhere." Nightfall brought temporary reprieve. Fog returned, shrouding the town in grey. U.S. paratroopers consolidated positions, counted casualties, and redistributed ammunition. Major Müller surveyed the streets from a rooftop, frustrated and humiliated. "They are fewer than we thought. Yet they have stopped us dead. How can this be?" The first day of the battle revealed a truth that would define the operation. It was not sheer numbers that dictated success, but initiative, flexibility, and the psychological leverage of determined fighters operating in unpredictable ways. The U.S. Paratroopers had intentionally allowed themselves to be surrounded not out of desperation, but as a strategic choice, designed to hold 10,000 SS soldiers in place and disrupt the German chain of command at a critical moment. As the first night fell over Arnhem, the Americans huddled in bombed-out buildings and makeshift foxholes, waiting for the morning and the next wave of attacks. Despite heavy casualties, their morale remained astonishingly high. Sergeant Harmon, surveying the ruins, whispered to a nearby comrade, "They think they've got us, but we've got them. They just don't know it yet." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. From the German perspective, the battle had become a slow, grinding nightmare. Orders were delayed or miscommunicated, armoured units became trapped in narrow roads, and infantry suffered constant harassment. Every moment they spent attempting to dislodge the paratroopers was a moment taken from the larger fight across Holland. By allowing themselves to be surrounded, the Americans had effectively turned the tide of operational control, holding the enemy at bay while setting the stage for the next 8 days of intense combat. Thus, the stage was set. A town encircled, an enemy immobilized, and a small force of citizen soldiers holding the initiative against some of the most elite troops Germany had to offer. The lessons of Arnhem, even in this first day, were clear. In modern warfare, initiative, adaptability, and audacity could overcome numerical superiority, and a disciplined, motivated force could hold back an entire army through skill, cunning, and sheer courage. September 18, 1944, 4:30 hours. The darkness over. Arnhem was thick, a black velvet shrouding the town in silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of distant gunfire and the faint hum of German armoured vehicles shifting through the narrow streets. The American paratroopers, now fully aware that they were surrounded, faced a moment of reckoning. Survival would depend not on numbers, but on discipline, resourcefulness, and sheer nerve. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Carter moved quietly through the shattered remains of a former textile warehouse, gathering his officers for a briefing. Around him, the faces of men, young and hardened alike, reflected exhaustion and tension. Some had been awake for more than 24 hours, navigating dense fog, machine gun fire, and treacherous terrain. Yet in their eyes burned the same determination that had driven them out of the CQ-27 transports the day before. "We are surrounded," Carter began, his voice low but commanding. "The Germans control the approaches from every side. We cannot push out. We cannot expect reinforcements immediately. Our mission now is simple. Hold, tie down as many of their troops as possible. Make them bleed. Every squad must defend a sector. Every man must know his role." Captain Robert Simmons of the 506th Pier nodded, already mapping defensive positions in his mind. The Americans quickly divided the town into sectors. Buildings were fortified with furniture, debris, and even cobblestones. Machine guns were emplaced in windows and doorways. Snipers selected elevated positions in the skeletal remains of municipal buildings and warehouses. Every street corner became a potential killing zone. Outside the town, German reconnaissance patrols scouted the perimeter. Major Heinrich Müller, furious at the slow progress of his panzer units, demanded reports from every subordinate. "Where are the paratroopers? Why haven't they surrendered?" Elusive tactics struggled to provide coherent answers. Reports were contradictory. Sightings varied from a dozen men to hundreds in unexpected locations. The confusion frustrated the German command and slowed their operational tempo. By mid-morning, the Germans had begun to consolidate for a decisive assault. The 9th SS Panzer Division, including elements of the 10th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, moved cautiously through the canals and hedgerows surrounding Arnhem. Their armoured columns, tanks, and half-tracks were powerful, but the narrow Dutch roads restricted manoeuvrability. Each corner, each farmhouse, could conceal an ambush. Sergeant Franz Becker of the 9th SS recounted, "Every street we entered seemed alive with shadows. Bullets came from windows, roofs, and even cellars. We never knew if it was a dozen or 100. We knew only that we could not advance freely. The paratroopers' improvisation became legendary during this phase. Lieutenant Carter assigned small mobile teams to patrol the periphery of their positions, striking German units attempting to consolidate. Bazooka teams disabled a half-track column outside the northern sector. Snipers targeted officers and radio operators, creating confusion among the ranks. Medics, under fire, established field stations in cellars and attics, keeping the wounded alive with morphine, plasma, and the limited supplies dropped during the initial airborne operation. In Sector C, Sergeant Harmon organized a counter-ambush near a canal bridge. Using a mix of pre-positioned explosives and heavy fire, his squad destroyed a column of German half-tracks, delaying the armored advance for several hours. He later described the event in a letter home. "We were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. And yet, for a few hours, we held the Germans back with nothing more than grit, clever use of terrain, and a lot of luck. Despite their resourcefulness, the Americans suffered heavy casualties. By late afternoon, entire squads had been decimated by mortar fire or sudden street engagements. Lieutenant Carter's unit had lost nearly 20% of its men in the first 26 hours. But the principle held. Every paratrooper who fell was replaced in the German mind by 2 or 3 more, unseen and unpredictable. The psychological effect of scattered, relentless resistance amplified the Americans' actual strength. The Germans, frustrated by the pace of their advance, attempted new tactics. Artillery units were deployed to shell known American positions, often at the cost of civilian buildings. Mortar teams targeted suspected paratrooper concentrations, sometimes hitting empty buildings or streets abandoned just moments before. Major Müller ordered the Panzer Grenadiers to clear the central town square, expecting a decisive breakthrough. Instead, they encountered small, disciplined American teams who had fortified the area with barricades and interlocking fields of fire. First Lieutenant James O'Leary, leading a platoon in the northern sector, described the experience. "We were essentially ghosts. 1 minute we were in the square. The next, we disappeared into a side street. They tried to follow us, but the alleys are narrow and twisted. We hit them where it hurt, then melted away. They couldn't pin us down." Throughout the day, the Americans executed a pattern of mobility and surprise attacks. They did not attempt to retake the bridges outright, focusing instead on slowing the German response and keeping the elite 9th SS engaged. This forced the Germans to commit units piecemeal, never massing for a decisive strike. By evening, the Germans were forced to re-evaluate. Orders to storm the northern bridge were delayed repeatedly, as commanders debated how best to concentrate their forces without incurring catastrophic losses in the narrow streets. Major Müller, increasingly desperate, relied on aerial reconnaissance to locate the Americans, but the dense urban environment limited visibility. Paratroopers had mastered the art of concealment, using smoke, rubble, and the natural contours of Arnhem to vanish at will. Meanwhile, morale among the Americans remained remarkably high. Corporal Harmon recalled, "Every time a squad repelled a German attack, it was as if the entire town gained energy. The men knew they were doing the impossible, and that knowledge fueled them." Food and water were scarce, but the paratroopers rationed carefully, ensuring that squads remained operational. Explosives and ammunition were salvaged from abandoned German vehicles, or hidden caches, demonstrating a resourcefulness that often left their enemies dumbfounded. The Germans' operational plan began to unravel entirely by the second day. They had expected the Americans to either collapse under pressure or be forced into a breakout. Instead, the paratroopers controlled key choke points, forced piecemeal engagements, and continually disrupted supply lines. Major Müller's reports reflected his growing despair. "Our forces are immobilized. We are stronger, yet we cannot advance. They are fewer in number, yet they seem everywhere." In the eastern sector of Arnhem, elements of the 101st Airborne faced particularly brutal fighting. Lieutenant Carter's adjutant, Captain Simmons, organized a counter-ambush near a canal, where a German infantry company attempted to flank American positions. Using the terrain to their advantage, the paratroopers funneled the Germans into a narrow passage, hitting them with concentrated fire and disabling 2 half-tracks. The Germans withdrew with heavy losses, and the Americans captured several prisoners who provided critical intelligence on enemy troop dispositions. The American strategy of selective engagement had broader operational consequences. By tying down 10,000 SS soldiers, including armored units, the paratroopers prevented them from reinforcing the southern front, where British and Canadian forces were pushing toward Eindhoven and Nijmegen. Each day, Arnhem remained contested. The Allies' advance across Holland gained precious hours. Even as Hermann morally faltered, internal tensions emerged among the paratroopers. Casualties mounted, communications remained fragmented, and supplies dwindled. Lieutenant Carter convened a council of officers in a half-ruined church at dusk. "We are surrounded," he said, his voice carrying across the broken pews. "But surrounded is not defeated. Each of you knows your men. Each of you knows the streets. Fight smart, conserve ammunition, and above all, hold. We may not take the bridges today, but every hour we last changes the course of the campaign." That night, small squads conducted stealth patrols, disrupting German positions, destroying communications, and spreading misinformation. One team, led by Sergeant Harmon, planted improvised explosives along a suspected Panzer route. The explosion, amplified by the echoes of Arnhem's ruined streets, created the illusion of a larger force. German troops, already unnerved by scattered encounters, hesitated to advance, allowing the Americans to consolidate their positions further. By the third day, September 19, the situation had become critical. Ammunition was dangerously low, and reinforcements from the British XXX Corps were delayed by flooded rivers and heavily defended crossings. Yet the Americans' determination had created a strategic paradox. The Germans controlled the encirclement, but the Americans dictated the tempo of the battle. Every attempt to break the paratroopers resulted in disproportionately high German casualties. Major Müller, observing the stalled advance from a command post in a partially destroyed farmhouse, wrote in his log, "We cannot predict where they will strike next. The urban terrain favors them, and our mechanized advantage is neutralized." The psychological impact on German soldiers cannot be overstated. Units that had been trained for blitzkrieg and rapid penetration were forced into cautious, methodical advances through streets, alleys, and ruined buildings. The paratroopers' use of improvised tactics, decoys, and selective engagement transformed Arnhem into a trap for the encircling force. As night fell on September 19, the Americans huddled in their positions, wounded men treated with plasma and morphine, the exhausted but determined fighting force, reflecting on the paradox of their mission. They had allowed themselves to be surrounded not out of defeat, but as a deliberate tactical maneuver designed to immobilize a superior enemy. By holding Arnhem, they had tied down 10,000 SS troops for days, preventing them from affecting the larger campaign in Holland. Lieutenant Carter, walking among his men, paused to observe the city's shattered skyline. "We are surrounded," he whispered. "But surrounded is temporary. The enemy is trapped by us, by what we've become in these streets. Hold fast, and we will emerge victorious. Or at least, we will have changed the course of the war." The first 3 days of Arnhem had demonstrated a remarkable reality. Tactical encirclement does not necessarily equal operational defeat. Through ingenuity, courage, and relentless determination, the American paratroopers transformed what could have been a catastrophic situation into a strategic masterstroke. By the end of September 19, the Germans were expending resources, suffering losses, and losing cohesion, while the Americans remained a ghostly, lethal presence in the city they nominally could not escape. As dawn approached on September 20, the echoes of gunfire, mortar explosions, and distant artillery were the only markers of time. For the Americans, each hour held dual significance: survival and influence. inflicted on the SS formations, rippled across the operational theatre, slowing German reinforcements, buying time for Allied ground forces, and cementing the legend of Arnhem's paratroopers citizen soldiers, holding professional warriors at bay through initiative, improvisation, and unyielding resolve. By the close of Chapter 2, the situation was stark. Arnhem was a cauldron of destruction, the Americans trapped but unbroken, the Germans frustrated and bleeding, and the broader campaign hanging in the balance. The paratroopers' deliberate choice to hold, to allow themselves to be surrounded, had begun to reap strategic dividends that would shape the remainder of Operation Market Garden and echo far beyond the narrow streets of the Dutch town. September 21, 1944. 3 hours. The early morning mist clung to Arnhem like a shroud, masking the devastation that had unfolded over the previous 4 days. Streets that had once carried the hum of bicycles and market carts were now lined with rubble, burned-out vehicles, and the bodies of both American and German soldiers. The paratroopers, still holding pockets of resistance, were acutely aware that the window for survival was shrinking. Supplies were exhausted, ammunition was critically low, and communications with British XXX Corps remained tenuous at best. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Carter walked the perimeter of the southern sector, noting the reinforced barricades, sandbags hastily stacked against artillery fire, and the bodies of fallen comrades serving as grim markers of the enemy's relentless pressure. He stopped briefly at a half-ruined canal bridge, observing a squad of sergeants coordinating defensive positions while under sporadic sniper fire. "Hold here," he muttered. "No matter what." The men nodded, faces grim but unflinching. By mid-morning, the SS forces intensified their assault. Major Heinrich Müller, now desperate to reclaim control, ordered concentrated armoured and infantry pushes into the heart of Arnhem. Tiger tanks prowled the streets, crushing barricades and creating zones of terror, while panzer grenadiers surged forward, using flamethrowers and mortars to clear fortified positions. Yet the Americans' use of the urban environment proved formidable. Buildings were rigged with improvised explosives, street corners became killing zones, and every alley allowed small teams to strike, retreat, and reappear elsewhere. Sergeant Daniel Harmon, leading a mobile squad, recalled a brutal encounter in the central market square. "We were down to about a dozen men. The SS pushed 3 tanks and a platoon of infantry. We had 1 bazooka, a handful of rifles, and some grenades. We used the alleyways, set charges behind doorways, and struck as shadows. The first tank went up in flames. The others retreated. It wasn't victory, but it slowed them. That was all we needed." Mobility, improvisation, and psychological disruption. Snipers picked off officers and radio operators, forcing German units to operate with fragmented command. Explosive charges disabled armoured vehicles, and squads conducted night raids to sabotage supply caches. Every action, no matter how small, magnified the perception of the paratroopers' strength. Despite these successes, the Americans were acutely aware of their precarious position. Communications with British reinforcements remained delayed due to German resistance along the road to Nijmegen. Food and medical supplies were nearly gone, and casualties were mounting. Lieutenant Carter convened a council of officers in a bombed-out schoolhouse. "We are surrounded. But we can still make this fight count. Every German we hold here is a victory in itself. Our mission is to tie them down, and we will do it, even if we pay dearly." Tenacity grew increasingly frustrated. Reports of paratrooper positions were inconsistent, and sightings often exaggerated. Major Müller ordered reconnaissance patrols and probing attacks, only to encounter ambushes and decoy positions. The paratroopers' ability to vanish and strike unpredictably created a tactical dilemma. The Germans could neither commit fully to an assault nor risk leaving gaps in their perimeter. By evening, the intensity of fighting reached its peak. Entire blocks had been transformed into fortified compounds, with barricades constructed from furniture, masonry, and even armoured vehicles. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated overlapping fields of fire, while medics moved constantly to treat wounded soldiers. Despite dwindling supplies, the Americans' morale remained high, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and the knowledge that every hour they held the Germans delayed the enemy's broader operations. One particularly harrowing engagement occurred near the Northern Bridge. Lieutenant James O'Leary's squad of 15 men faced a combined German force of over 100. Using a mix of Molotov cocktails, sniper fire and improvised explosives, the squad inflicted significant casualties and forced the enemy to withdraw temporarily. O'Leary later recounted, "We knew we couldn't hold forever, but every second we delayed them mattered. We weren't just fighting for survival, we were shaping the battlefield." Nightfall on September 21 brought a temporary lull, but the tension remained palpable. The Americans conducted small patrols to gather intelligence and locate additional ammunition, often venturing dangerously close to German positions. Corporal Harmon led one such patrol, retrieving supplies from a partially destroyed German supply depot. "We had to take the risk," he said. "Every bit of ammo, every first aid kit, it was life or death for someone, and we were determined to keep fighting." September 22, the strategic impact of the paratroopers' stand became increasingly evident. 10,000 SS troops were tied down in Arnhem, unable to support operations elsewhere. British and Canadian forces faced less resistance along the corridor to Nijmegen, and the broader Allied advance in Holland was able to continue despite the heavy losses at Arnhem. The Americans' sacrifice had created a ripple effect, influencing the operational tempo of the campaign far beyond the city streets. The Germans, recognizing the futility of frontal assaults in the urban environment, shifted to siege tactics. Artillery and mortar fire rained down on the American positions, and flamethrower teams cleared buildings block by block. Small units withdrew strategically, regrouped in fortified positions, and continued to harass German supply lines. Structural advantage allowed them to maintain their presence despite overwhelming odds. Lieutenant Carter observed the unfolding chaos from the roof of a ruined municipal building. He noted the ingenuity and courage of his men. Squads had constructed tunnels through basements to move undetected. Civilians had assisted in providing food and intelligence, and medics had improvised surgical procedures with limited equipment. The Americans had become an almost mythical force in the eyes of the German command, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously and vanishing before counterattacks could be coordinated. By the afternoon of September 23, supplies had become critical. Ammunition was nearly exhausted, and food rations were minimal. Lieutenant Carter's staff devised a plan to redistribute resources, prioritizing frontline squads and critical defensive positions. Medical teams triaged the wounded, improvising with available supplies to keep as many soldiers operational as possible. The determination to hold Arnhem had become as much a mental battle as a physical one. German forces attempted to exploit weaknesses in the American perimeter. Panzer units maneuvered through side streets and alleys, while infantry attempted to penetrate barricades with flamethrowers and explosives. Every advance was met with disciplined, coordinated resistance. Sergeant Harmon's squad successfully ambushed a Panzergrenadier unit attempting to flank the southern sector, using improvised explosives and concentrated rifle fire to force a retreat. Each such engagement exacted a heavy toll on the Germans, further slowing their overall advance. By September 24, it was clear that the Americans' position was untenable in the long term. British reinforcements were still delayed, the Germans had reinforced their siege, and casualties among paratroopers had reached critical levels. Yet, even in the face of imminent defeat, the Americans maintained their strategic purpose. Each day they held Arnhem immobilized German forces, inflicted losses, and bought time for the broader Allied campaign. Lieutenant Carter reminded his officers, "We may not survive this, but our mission is still being achieved. That is what matters." Throughout the battle, the psychological impact of the paratroopers' resistance on the German command was profound. Reports from Major Müller and other officers frequently noted the confusion, unpredictability, and determination of the American forces. The Germans had expected to crush a lightly armed airborne unit quickly. Instead, they found themselves engaged in a protracted urban battle against a fraction of the men they had anticipated, forced to commit elite units piecemeal and suffer heavy losses. By September 25, the Americans were running on sheer willpower. Ammunition was nearly depleted, food supplies had run out, and many soldiers were wounded. Yet their tactical discipline and understanding of the terrain allowed them to continue delaying German advances. Sniper teams continued to operate effectively, small squads conducted raids on enemy positions, and barricades remained strong despite repeated attacks. The paratroopers' ability to maintain cohesion and morale in the face of encirclement became legendary. The final hours of the American defense were marked by extraordinary acts of courage and ingenuity. Corporal Harmon and a small team successfully destroyed a German command post using improvised charges, cutting off communication between several SS units. Lieutenant O'Leary's squad managed to disable a tank column with a combination of bazooka fire and street barricades, forcing the Germans to divert additional resources to secure the area. These actions, though costly, further immobilized the enemy and prevented them from influencing the broader operational theater. By dusk on September 20, it was clear that the Americans' time in Arnhem was nearing its end. The encirclement had tightened, supplies were exhausted, and casualties were severe. Yet the paratroopers' stand had achieved its operational objective. They had held 10,000 SS troops in place for 9 days, delaying German reinforcements, inflicting disproportionate casualties, and buying critical time for the Allied advance elsewhere in Holland. Lieutenant Colonel Carter made the difficult decision to withdraw surviving forces under cover of darkness, coordinating with remaining British units to facilitate extraction. The Americans left behind only those unable to move due to wounds, ensuring that every remaining soldier could contribute to the broader operational picture. The evacuation was perilous, with German forces maintaining constant pressure, but it succeeded in preserving the majority of the fighting force for future operations. In the aftermath, Arnhem stood as a testament to the courage, ingenuity, and resilience of the American paratroopers. Outnumbered and undersupplied, they had turned the situation into a strategic advantage, immobilizing elite German units and shaping the course of the campaign in northern Holland. Their actions demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Initiative, adaptability, and determination could offset numerical and material inferiority, and a small, well-trained force could achieve outsized impact through skillful use of terrain, tactics, and psychological leverage. The Germans, for their part, were forced to acknowledge the effectiveness of the paratroopers. Major Müller's post-battle reports reflected both frustration and grudging admiration. These Americans, though few in number, fought with the skill, initiative, and determination of a much larger force. Their presence dictated our movements, disrupted our operations, and imposed delays that will have consequences far beyond Arnhem. They were citizen soldiers, yet they fought like professionals, and we underestimated them at our peril. For the Allies, the lessons of Arnhem were equally profound. Tactical setbacks, failure to immediately secure bridges and consolidate positions were outweighed by operational success. The Americans' deliberate decision to allow themselves to be surrounded, their ability to hold key positions, and the resulting immobilization of 10,000 SS troops exemplified the power of initiative and adaptability in modern warfare. By the morning of September 26th, Arnhem was left in ruins, but the paratroopers' stand had achieved its purpose. The remaining forces regrouped with British units, bringing experience, knowledge, and the scars of battle to inform future operations. The memory of 9 days of encirclement, resistance, and tactical brilliance would endure, shaping military doctrine and serving as a case study in courage, innovation, and the decisive impact of small unit action against numerically superior forces. As Lieutenant Colonel Carter reflected on the operation, he understood the paradox at the heart of Arnhem. The Americans had allowed themselves to be surrounded, yet, in doing so, they had gained control over the strategic situation. The 10,000 SS troops they held in place could have been deployed elsewhere, potentially altering the course of the Allied advance. Instead, the paratroopers had leveraged audacity, ingenuity, and determination to achieve operational success, even in the face of tactical adversity. The Battle of Arnhem would come to symbolize the power of citizen soldiers, the importance of initiative in warfare, and the capacity of small, determined forces to shape the outcome of larger campaigns. The paratroopers' stand, though costly, demonstrated that courage, discipline, and adaptability could overcome even the most formidable of opponents, leaving a legacy that would influence military thinking for generations. September 26, 1944. Arnhem lay in ruins. Streets that had once thrummed with civilian life were now scoured with craters, rubble, and the remnants of barricades. The city bore witness to the ferocity of battle and the determination of paratroopers who had, against all odds, held 10,000 SS troops at bay for 9 days. Yet while Arnhem itself was devastated, the strategic effects of the airborne stand were profound and far-reaching. For the Allies, Arnhem represented a paradox. The mission to secure the bridges had failed in the immediate tactical sense. The paratroopers had not captured the northern bridge intact, and reinforcements from XXX Corps had been delayed, unable to break through the German defences in time. Supplies had been exhausted, casualties were staggering, and many soldiers had been captured or killed. By holding elite German forces in place, the paratroopers prevented the SS from reinforcing critical sectors along the Allied advance, buying invaluable time for operations elsewhere in Holland. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Carter, walking through the shattered streets, reflected on the resilience of his men. "We were surrounded," he admitted, "outnumbered, undersupplied. But every street we held, every ambush we executed, every delay we inflicted mattered. 10,000 SS troops we tied down could have been elsewhere. That was our victory." His words echoed the sentiment that would become central to analyses of the battle. Tactical defeat does not preclude strategic success. The Germans, meanwhile, were forced to confront the consequences of underestimating the Americans. Major Heinrich Müller, writing in his post-battle report, described the paratroopers as an enemy we had not anticipated. They fought in a manner that suggested larger numbers, used terrain masterfully, and disrupted our command and control at every opportunity. Their presence dictated our movements, slowed our operations, and forced costly deployments of armoured units. The city's ruins bore witness to this resistance. The northern bridge, though damaged, remained in German hands, yet the streets of Arnhem had become a labyrinth of American ingenuity. Buildings were rigged with explosives, street barricades had slowed tank columns, and improvised snipers had transformed alleys into death traps. Even after evacuation, the impression of American capability lingered, shaping German perceptions of airborne operations for the remainder of the war. Casualty figures highlighted the cost of the stand. The Americans had suffered heavily, over 500 killed, wounded, or captured during the 9-day engagement. German losses, particularly among elite SS units, were significantly higher, numbering over dice 000. These figures underscore the disproportionate impact of disciplined, determined paratroopers on larger, mechanized forces. The ability of a small, mobile, and adaptable force to shape operational outcomes became a defining feature of modern military thought. The human cost, however, extended beyond statistics. Survivors spoke of exhaustion, hunger, and the psychological strain of constant combat under encirclement. Medics worked tirelessly, improvising procedures with limited supplies, while officers maintained morale through sheer determination and example. Corporal Daniel Harmon recalled, "We had nothing left, no ammo, no food, just each other. We became more than soldiers, we became the obstacle the Germans couldn't bypass." Beyond the immediate military impact, Arnhem left lasting lessons for both sides. For the Allies, it demonstrated the power of initiative and decentralized command. Paratroopers had operated independently, improvising tactics and exploiting terrain to maximum effect. They had transformed chaos into opportunity, turning encirclement into a strategic advantage. The battle validated the principle that well-trained, flexible forces could achieve disproportionate results against numerically superior opponents. For the Germans, Arnhem highlighted the dangers of underestimating airborne operations. Elite units, including SS Panzer divisions, had been committed piecemeal and suffered heavy casualties as a result. Command and control had been disrupted by the Americans' mobility and unpredictability, forcing German commanders to devote significant resources to a relatively small force. The psychological impact of the paratroopers' audacity lingered, influencing planning and caution in subsequent operations, including the failed response to Operation Market Garden later that month. Civilian experiences added another layer of complexity. Arnhem's inhabitants had endured bombardment, occupation, and the constant threat of crossfire. Many aided the paratroopers, providing food, intelligence, or shelter, while others were caught in the violence. The interaction between soldiers and civilians underscored the multifaceted nature of modern warfare, where urban terrain and local populations could shape operational outcomes as much as combat units themselves. In the years that followed, Arnhem became a case study in military academies worldwide. Analyses emphasized several key takeaways: the value of initiative under encirclement, the effectiveness of small unit tactics in urban environments, the psychological impact of persistent resistance, and the operational advantage created by tying down superior forces. The Americans' ability to hold 10,000 SS troops for 9 days, despite being surrounded and outnumbered, illustrated the enduring principle that morale, training, and adaptability can outweigh numerical superiority. The paratroopers' legacy extended beyond tactics and strategy. Arnhem symbolized the democratization of elite military capability. Citizen soldiers, farmers, factory workers, students had outperformed professional troops, demonstrating initiative, resilience, and resourcefulness. Their actions challenged the notion that only highly trained, hierarchical forces could achieve operational objectives against determined opposition. The battle became emblematic of a broader shift in modern warfare. The capacity of industrialized democracies to mobilize, equip, and deploy adaptable forces capable of altering the course of campaigns. Historians and veterans alike recognized the moral and symbolic significance of the stand. Lieutenant Colonel Carter noted, "We were not just fighting to hold a city, we were demonstrating what a determined, committed force could achieve." And tenacity can shape history, even in the face of overwhelming odds. German officers, writing after the war, echoed similar sentiments. The Americans had fought beyond expectations, transforming a tactical encirclement into an operational constraint that shaped the campaign's outcome. Finally, Arnhem's story underscored the interplay between tactical adversity and strategic success. While the Americans did not achieve all objectives, their ability to impose delays, inflict losses, and immobilize elite enemy units created conditions for Allied forces to advance elsewhere. The 9-day encirclement became a force multiplier, demonstrating that operational impact can emerge even from apparent tactical setbacks. As the sun set over Arnhem in the weeks and months following the battle, the city remained scarred but symbolically victorious. The paratroopers' stand had achieved its purpose. They had held 10,000 SS troops in place, inflicted disproportionate losses, and shaped the operational environment to the Allies' advantage. Arnhem became a testament to the principles of initiative, adaptability, and the power of small, determined forces to achieve strategic effects beyond their size. In military history, Arnhem would endure as a defining example of how courage, training, and resourcefulness can overcome encirclement, delay superior forces, and create lasting operational impact. The paratroopers' stand remains a study in audacity, resilience, and the capacity of citizen soldiers to challenge and shape professional armies. Arnhem, though a tactical defeat in the immediate sense, was a strategic triumph, a lesson in the transformative power of determination, skill, and the human spirit in warfare. Up next, You've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.